Hi, welcome back to the channel. Michelle, and today I want to talk about this resource, A History of Us by Joy Hakim. So I've seen this recommended quite a few times in the homeschooling online community. So it was available through my library, through one of our library systems. I was able to have it sent to my library and look it over because I'm always on the lookout for resources, especially when it comes to history, but I do like to, pre-read them before I buy anything. So this one, like I said, was really recommended online. So I got it, I looked at it. I have to say I'm really disappointed with this as a resource. And I wanted to talk about why I found it to be a disappointing resource. And I'm gonna go through and actually flip the camera around and talk about some of the issues I had with this. And I don't expect any history-based curriculum or resource to be completely free of bias. Bias will exist, but I have to say of the resources I've read, this one is one of the highest bias I have found. So I'm gonna go through and just talk about why I personally wouldn't use this resource and why I don't think it's a good resource. Now, I am no expert in history. I don't have any credentials in history, but one thing in our homeschool that I'm very intentional about is using resources from the people we're discussing. So this one is all about the first Americans, prehistory to 1600s. So we're going to talk about indigenous people in this. We're going to talk about Columbus. We're going to talk about a lot of those areas. So when I'm looking for a resource for that, I pull from those areas where those perspectives and voices are being heard. So you're not just getting the Eurocentric whitewashed version of history, which is so common, but really looking at the voices of the people that's happening during this time period and getting their take on things. So that's kind of how I approach things. So I was willing to look this over and read it, and I have to say that by the second chapter, I was literally cringing at some of the things I was reading. So I'm going to go through and just highlight some of the things that I think we need to discuss and why maybe this isn't a great resource. I don't have time to go through the entire book. That would be a super long video. So you can see I do have some post-its here that I just kind of highlighted that kind of red flagged for me that I want to talk about why this wouldn't work for my homeschool. So here is the book, and right away I did look at the credentials of the author, and she does not have any type of degree in history. It says she has a master's, I believe, but I couldn't find anywhere where she had a master's in. So again, that educational aspect of if I'm looking at a resource, I want someone who's got the credentials to back that up. And I can definitely see within here how that isn't the case. So the first big red flag I found was the why is history important part is she goes on and says that she believes the United States of America is the most remarkable nation that has ever existed. No other nation in the history of the world has ever provided so much freedom, so much justice, and so much opportunity to so many people. So right there, I can definitely tell where her viewpoint is coming from. And she goes on to say that you don't have to agree with that, which I do appreciate that. Although she's inserting her opinion a lot and her viewpoint a lot in this, she does say you don't have to agree with it. But I think coming from this mentality that you're already setting the stage that how you're going to view, especially history when it comes to North America or the United States, it's definitely going to be from one point of view. Another one over here. So she's talking about why the United States in itself is unique. Ideas have a lot to do with it. Nations stand on their ideas. We're lucky the architects who designed this nation had sound ideas. They were looking for liberty, justice, and opportunity when they came here, and they made sure the United States provided. I think she missed an opportunity there because obviously the founding fathers did not create this nation or the rules that govern it for everybody. It was definitely made for rich white men, let's be real. I'm definitely not gonna hold back when I'm talking about my thoughts on this. This is one perspective you're getting, one very narrow perspective. So right there, I was already like, okay, I know this isn't going to go well. But I kept reading on. And then some of the bigger red flags I found were her use of the word Indian. Now I know this book is older, so some people might say maybe that's because just of the time period. It does have The copyright, 1993, 1999, 2003, 2005. So that might be why some people think, okay, maybe that's why they're using that terminology. But she goes in here to kind of defend the use of Indian in this, in history and in this book. And now, again, I am not an indigenous person. I don't lay claim to understanding all of indigenous people and the specific tribes and the namings of all that, but I do try to educate myself on this. Every November in our homeschool for Native American Heritage Month, we focus heavily on indigenous people, whether that be specific tribes, looking at the myth of the Thanksgiving story, whatever it might be. So I feel like we do have a good understanding of indigenous tribes. But I am in no way an expert. I am not also come from any indigenous tribe. I want to make that very clear. But I find it concerning here that she says that calling them that we're all Native Americans because we all came from different places. I think that's really disrespectful to indigenous people, kind of erasing their identity, and that North America was very heavily populated by many different indigenous tribes. I really dislike that throughout the book, she lumps indigenous people as one group, and there are tons of different indigenous tribes. And that she goes in to say that they're fine being called Indian. Why would indigenous people want to be called Indian by someone who named them that and created and was responsible for the mass killings of many indigenous people? I'm talking about Columbus and his genocide towards this group of people. Why would you think indigenous people would want to be called Indian by someone who massacred their people? So I just found that extremely disrespectful. But again, that's my opinion on that. And then here, the red flag I found here, she definitely is inserting her opinion here. Now, I'm not saying, like I said, history books, textbooks, books about history will always have a bias in them. There's no escaping that. But the fact that she literally inserts her opinion, often in parentheses, about kind of how she views it, I don't think is a good way, especially if this is a child reading this book. You're going to naturally adapt that biased viewpoint while you're reading it. So I don't like that. But right here, she's talking about one thing that the Indians never did was make good use of the wheel. Like somehow they were less than or ignorant because they didn't use the wheel. She doesn't go into like the amazing inventions and creations they did have, but just because they didn't use this one specific thing that was very Eurocentric, the wheel, that they were at a disadvantage. So I don't like that viewpoint. So she does go into Eskimos again, Inuit, not Eskimo. So the next part will be this right here. So she goes into talking about how Indian people, again, lumping them all together, really enjoyed having parties, and they were big party people, and perhaps because they were so vain. First of all, they were festivals, not parties. Indigenous people are very intentional with honoring like harvest festivals. They have many festivals throughout the year because they give thanks to the different things they're doing. So they have a strawberry festival for giving thanks for the harvest of a good year. It's not parties and showing off. It's them honoring their culture. That one. All right, so for this chapter, chapter 9, she goes into Plains Indians. So we're actually talking about a specific group of indigenous people in this. And the thing I found really concerning is this idea that she talks about the hunting of the buffalo. And the Plains Indians depended on the buffalo for food and clothing. By the end of the next century, the buffalo would be almost extinct, killed by the wasteful people. And who do you think those wasteful people are? So she goes in here to talk about how they use certain parts of the buffalo and they would just discard it and they would just kill the buffalo, and it eventually, because you can see in her parentheses here, they would go extinct. And she's kind of blaming that on this specific tribe. So I wanted to show a different perspective on this. So I brought in this book. So this is Rethinking Columbus, Next 500 Years. And this is one of the resources I picked up for Native American Heritage Month that we study in November. I'll link above some of the resources I use for that. But again, this is a resource from 1998. So you can't say, oh, this is an older book, that's why that bias exists. This is from 1998. So going in here, you can see the sacred buffalo. And it goes into how indigenous people treated living things. And again, this ties into what we did this past November, which was Mint and Bloom's Thanksgiving, New Perspectives on an Old Story, which also went into the harvest, the honorable harvest, which is a set of beliefs that indigenous people ascribe to. So kind of like, not rules, but things they follow. And I will link down below the article that details these things that they follow, and the person, the author, so you can vet it for yourself and decide if that for you is a good resource. But these are I printed them really quick so you could see that these are the set of rules that indigenous tribes tend to follow. They ask permission for the ones whose lives you seek, abide by the answer. They never take first and they never take the last. They harvest in a way that minimizes harm. They take only what they need and leave some for others. Use everything that you take only which is given to you. Share it as the earth has shared it with you. Be grateful, reciprocate that gift, and sustain the ones who sustain you, and the earth will last forever. So that's kind of where the indigenous viewpoint is coming from. And in here, it's backed up by this resource as well, saying that the buffalo were sacred to them. They used every part of it. They didn't hunt it into extinction. And if you continue to read, the buffalo extinction came from a strategic move on the part of white people who were trying to actually wipe out the Plains Indians. So you can see here it says the U.S. General Phil Sheridan knew that the survival of the buffalo was essential to the survival of the Plains Indians tribes. In their strategic move to bring the tribes to their knees, he launched a campaign to wipe out the bison herds when his over 60 million buffalo lay dead. That is why there was such a large amount of buffalo killed. Not because the indigenous people were being indulgent or just killing a bunch of buffalo that they found sacred. It's because they were a group of people were trying to wipe out this Plains Indian tribe. So I found that really frustrating to read about, and that one perspective, and that they completely disregarded those kind of sacred indigenous rules that they follow. So it's really only giving you one perspective. So the next part is Columbus. We're gonna get into Columbus, which again, I think you can tell a lot about a history resource based on its treatment or viewpoint of indigenous people in Columbus. So this right here talks about how, Columbus's thoughts about when he first encountered the indigenous people. And one of the reviews I saw talked about how they really appreciated the fact that there was primary source documents in here. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of cherry picking of those documents. And it talks about here in the Before Columbus book, Rethinking Columbus book, about how certain things are pulled out to give you an idea or perspective, a very narrow perspective. So yeah, Columbus said, we exchanged gifts, they were very nice. But he also goes on to talk about how he related them to savages and animals because of that they didn't wear clothing. So it makes him seem like this really nice guy that he's, seeing these people for people. He didn't even see them as people. If you read his actual full-length diary readings, which we have gone through in our studies for Native American Heritage Month. So again, it's giving that one perspective. And then over here, it briefly touches on how he would go on to kidnap and enslave indigenous people. So this little paragraph talks about just briefly that he would turn many of the indigenous people into slaves, and that the diseases brought over by Europeans would kill a lot of people. That's the little paragraph you get here. It completely leaves out, again, just before Columbus book, Rethinking Columbus book, talks about how he pretty much started slave trades in order to do the work that he wanted to be done. So he forcibly removed indigenous people for trophies. Some of them were trophies to bring back to Spain and show off and be like, hey, this is what I did. And there was resistance from the indigenous people. The way it's written here, it seems like, oh, they just went with them. No, there was resistance. They didn't want to go. There was fighting. People were killed trying to resist this. And it talks in this Rethinking Columbus book how the historian, how they frame things like genocide, the mistreatment of other humans, really forms your viewpoint of that specific event, that specific person in history. And this is not giving the full account. This is not even giving a little bit of the account, in my opinion. So the last one I'm going to talk about is this one, because workers are needed to grow crops, and because Spaniards didn't want to work in the fields and the Indians were dying, black people would be brought from Africa to be field workers. They're talking about slavery. That's what they're talking about, not field workers. They're talking about slavery, about bringing African Americans forcibly to work here against their will. Again, that's talking about how that historian, how that person, author is framing it, forms your viewpoint on it. This is inaccurate. Calling slaves field workers is disrespectful. That's just my opinion. You could disagree with it, but this is why I couldn't get through half the book, because I started getting so angry about what I was reading. And it's not that it's just inaccurate. There's definitely parts in this that are inaccurate, but it's such one perspective you're given. And that one perspective is seething with bias throughout this entire book. So that is one of the reasons I will not touch this book. I have not looked at any of the other books, and I have no desire to after reading this book, honestly. And I have no desire, I know she does a science one as well. Don't want to touch it. Nope, not after this. I think this was a great example of bias writing, and I'm sure you could bring it into your homeschool as an example of that, but I would honestly never purchase this. I would never want any type of money to go towards this, because I think it's that bad, and I don't understand why this is so widely recommended within the homeschooling community. I don't know if it's because I'm more woke, as some people would put it, and I care more about those perspectives that aren't being talked about in history, that I find it more offensive, this type of writing. I don't know what the answer is, but I would not recommend this at all. So if you've used it or you're using it and you have some thoughts on it, I'd love to hear it. I'm not opposed to hearing different thoughts. My perspective going through this, I was really disappointed with the things that were covered and talked about and the perspective was given. But again, I'm not the end-all, say-all of everything, so I'm always welcome to listen to other points of view. Or if you've used other books, were they similar to this? Was it that heavy bias, or was it less bias? I'd love to hear that if this follows through, because I know there's a whole series of these. Does the whole series do that? Because wow, that would be a lot. So let me know down in the comments below. If you have any questions, let me know. If not, thank you for watching.